Jake challenged a limping veteran at Honor Bar. Now he's missing teeth and facing assault charges. We'll break down the exact moment this bully realized he'd made a terrible mistake and why underestimating a trained combat instructor never ends well. The Honor Medal Bar stood as a sanctuary in downtown Millfield, its wooden walls adorned with military memorabilia and faded photographs of service members. American flags hung alongside unit banners, creating a respectful atmosphere that attracted both veterans and civilians who appreciated the establishment's unique character. Mike Sullivan maintained his position near the entrance, his watchful gaze scanning the room with practiced efficiency. Despite his imposing height, most patrons noticed his pronounced limp first, a permanent reminder of an IED explosion in Afghanistan's Helmand province. The injury had ended his 12-year career with the Marine Corps, but not his sense of purpose. Tonight, he wore a simple black t-shirt with Honor Medal Bar security, printed across the back, dark jeans, and well-worn tactical boots. Nothing about his appearance screamed military, except to those who knew what to look for. The Marine Corps ring on his right hand, the faded forearm tattoo partially visible below his sleeve, and the unmistakable alert stillness that combat veterans never quite shed. Regular patrons respected Mike's quiet authority. They recognized the eyes that missed nothing. The same eyes that had once scanned distant ridge lines for enemy movement now tracked potential trouble among the Friday night crowd. The bar owner had hired Mike not just for his physical capabilities, but for his judgment, the ability to defuse situations before they escalated. Clusters of customers filled the tables, their conversations creating a comfortable background hum. In one corner, a group of Vietnam veterans gathered for their weekly meetup. At the bar, younger Iraq and Afghanistan vets traded stories over craft beers. Civilians mingled respectfully, drawn by the bar's reputation for good drinks and a trouble-free atmosphere, a reputation Mike worked hard to maintain. Little did anyone know that tonight, that peaceful atmosphere would be severely tested. The door banged open, letting in a blast of cold air and unwelcome noise. Conversations paused as heads turned toward the entrance. Jake Matthews swaggered in, flanked by three equally boisterous friends. His physique, sculpted through obsessive gym sessions and possibly chemical assistance, strained against a tight t-shirt emblazoned with tap out or blackout. Tribal tattoos snaked up his arms, disappearing beneath his sleeves. This place dead or what? Jake's voice carried across the room, deliberately louder than necessary. He slapped one friend's shoulder, laughing at his own observation. Let's wake it up. Mike observed silently from his position, noting Jake's aggressive body language and the MMA-style fighting gloves partially visible in his back pocket. A red flag, but not yet cause for intervention. The group pushed their way to the bar, shouldering past an older couple without acknowledgement. Jake leaned over the counter, snapping his fingers at the bartender who was finishing another customer's order. 4 Jaeger bombs. Make it quick, Jake demanded, rapping his knuckles on the wooden surface. The bartender, a former Army medic named Sarah, gave him a measured look before nodding and turning to prepare the drinks. Jake's gaze swept the room dismissively, his eyes lingering on the military photos with visible contempt. Check out the museum, he said loudly to his friends. Bunch of has-beens glorifying their glory days. A palpable tension rippled through the room. The Vietnam veterans at their regular table fell silent, exchanging glances. 2 younger Marines at the bar straightened, but a subtle head shake from Mike kept them in place. As Jake's group received their drinks, they claimed a table by pushing aside a reserve sign. When a customer politely mentioned the table was being held, Jake flexed his arms and asked, "You gonna do something about it?" The customer backed off immediately. Mike shifted his weight, adjusting his stance to ease the pressure on his bad leg. He'd seen this type before, men who mistook aggression for strength, who confused intimidation with respect. He continued watching, knowing from experience that such behavior typically escalated before it improved. 30 minutes and several rounds later, Jake's volume had increased proportionally with his alcohol intake. His stories about local cage fights and street brawls dominated the bar's atmosphere, forcing other conversations into strained whispers. When Jake stood to order another round, he bumped into Mike, who had moved closer to monitor the situation. "Whoa, what do we have here?" Jake's eyes fixed on Mike's pronounced limp as he regained his balance. "The bar hired a gimp for security? That's rich." The room went eerily quiet. Mike maintained his professional demeanor, his expression neutral. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your voice down. Other customers are trying to enjoy their evening," Mike said, his tone measured but firm. Jake's friend snickered, emboldened by liquid courage. Jake circled Mike, exaggerating a limping walk. "Yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir." Jake mocked, throwing a sloppy salute. "What happened, old man? Trip over your walker?" Mike's mind flashed momentarily to a dusty road outside Kandahar, the deafening explosion, the searing pain, the frantic shouts of his unit as they scrambled for cover under enemy fire. 3 Marines had died that day. Mike had been lucky to keep his leg. "I'm asking you nicely to respect the establishment and other patrons," Mike replied, his voice still calm though his eyes had hardened. Jake stepped closer, invading Mike's personal space. The stench of alcohol and aggression radiated from him. "Or what? You'll hobble after me?" Jake poked Mike's chest with his finger. "What's a broken-down old soldier gonna do?" Mike remained motionless, but subtle changes occurred in his posture. Shifts so slight that only someone with combat training would notice. His weight redistributed, his breathing regulated, his awareness expanded. These weren't conscious decisions, but automatic responses honed through years of training and combat experience. "This is your final warning," Mike said quietly. "Lower your voice, stop disturbing other customers, or I'll have to ask you to leave." Jake's face flushed with anger at being challenged, especially by someone he perceived as physically inferior. His friends had formed a loose semicircle, anticipating entertainment. "You hear that, boys?" Jake announced to the bar. "Captain Limpy here thinks he can throw me out." He turned back to Mike, his expression darkening. "I've broken guys twice your size for looking at me wrong. What makes you think you can tell me what to do?" Mike said nothing, but his silence carried weight that Jake was too arrogant to recognize. Jake interpreted Mike's silence as fear, his ego swelling with perceived dominance. He pressed forward, each taunt more personal than the last. "Did they kick you out when you got crippled? Couldn't hack it anymore." Jake circled Mike like a shark smelling blood. "What kind of pathetic outfit would keep a gimp like you anyway?" A muscle twitched in Mike's jaw, the first visible crack in his composure. At a corner table, an older veteran with a Vietnam service cap leaned toward his companion. "That kid has no idea who he's talking to," he whispered. His friend nodded knowingly. $20, says Sullivan, doesn't even need his good leg to put that punk down." Jake continued his verbal assault, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension flowing through the bar. Other patrons had gone silent, some uncomfortable, others watching with knowing anticipation. "I bet you weren't even in real combat," Jake sneered. "Probably some desk jockey who tripped over his own feet. Got yourself a cushy disability check for life, right?" Mike's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Those who knew him recognized a danger sign, like the slight temperature drop before a devastating storm. "Shut your mouth, Jake," Sarah the bartender called out, her patience finally exhausted. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Jake turned toward her with an exaggerated expression of fear. "Ooh, I'm so scared. What's it gonna do? Call for backup?" He turned back to Mike with a dismissive gesture. "Real soldiers don't end up as crippled bouncers." The word soldier carried particular weight, especially when directed at a Marine. Another micro shift in Mike's stance revealed his growing tension, though his expression remained professionally blank. Several veterans at the bar exchanged glances, recognizing the disciplined restraint Mike was exercising. One subtly checked his watch, timing how long Mike's legendary patience will hold against such deliberate provocation. Jake leaned in closer, his face inches from Mike's. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or did you leave your spine in whatever sandbox you crawled out of?" Mike remained silent, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, a glimpse of the warrior beneath the security guard's calm exterior. One of Jake's friends, sensing the shifting atmosphere, pulled at his sleeve. "Dude, maybe we should move on. Plenty of other bars." Jake shook him off, irritated at the interruption of his power play. "What's your problem? This gimpy rent-a-cop doesn't scare me." An older veteran at the bar, gray-haired with a weathered face, leaned toward Jake's hesitant friend. You might want to tell your buddy that's Master Sergeant Michael Sullivan, the veteran said quietly. Former Force Recon. Combat instructor at Quantico for 5 years before his last deployment. Jake's friend blinked, recognition dawning. Wait, Sullivan? The guy who got the Navy Cross for the Hellman operation. The veteran nodded. Carried 3 wounded Marines through an active firefight after their position was overrun. Took a round to the knee and still managed to call in air support that saved what was left of his unit. Jake's friend paled visibly, his eyes darting between Mike and Jake. He tugged at Jake's arm more urgently. Bro, we should seriously go. This guy. Get off me. Jake snapped, shoving his friend back. I don't care if he's Captain America. In here, he's just a cripple who needs to learn some respect. Mike remained impassive, but subtle changes had occurred in his positioning. His injured leg was now slightly behind him, bearing less weight. His hands, previously relaxed, had shifted to a neutral position that would allow for quicker movement. His breathing had slowed deliberately, the controlled respiration pattern of a combatant preparing for engagement. These changes weren't theatrical or obvious. They were the instinctive adjustments of a trained fighter assessing threats and preparing responses. Around the bar, the atmosphere transformed. Those with military experience recognized what was happening. The coiled readiness, the calculated patience. Several patrons discreetly moved tables and chairs aside, creating space without obvious intention. The Vietnam veteran who had been watching nudged his buddy. Remember what Staff Sergeant Davis used to say? His friend nodded, eyes fixed on Mike. It's not the loud ones you need to worry about. Jake, oblivious to these currents, interpreted Mike's restraint as weakness. His confidence growing, he moved even closer. What's it gonna be, Limpy? You gonna try to throw me out with that bum leg? Jake's voice dropped to a menacing growl. Or are you finally realizing you're out of your depth? Mike finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent bar. Sir, this is your last warning. Leave now, or there will be consequences. Jake's eyes widened at what he perceived as a direct challenge. His pride, already inflated by alcohol and an audience, wouldn't allow him to back down. Consequences. Jake laughed incredulously, turning to make sure his friends were watching this triumph. Let me show you some consequences. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his MMA gloves, slowly fitting them over his hands with theatrical precision. The bar patrons shifted uneasily, some moving further back, while others leaned forward, anticipating what would follow. These hands are registered weapons. Jake announced the room, flexing his fingers within the padded gloves. 2-time champion at the Metro Fight Club, undefeated in street competitions. Mike remained still, but a subtle transformation had occurred. Though he hadn't visibly moved, he somehow seemed more present, more solid, like air condensing into steel. Veterans in the room recognized this change immediately. Civilians sensed it without understanding what they were witnessing. The distance between the two men had become charged space, a battlefield in miniature. Jake bounced lightly on his feet, rolling his shoulders and neck in practice pre-fight rituals. Mike stood perfectly still, conserving energy, making no unnecessary movements. Jake, don't do this, his more sober friend pleaded one final time. This isn't worth it. Shut up and watch. Jake snapped, his focus narrowing to man before him. I'm gonna teach this has been a lesson about respect. The room had reorganized itself unconsciously. Tables and chairs pushed back, forming an impromptu arena. Patrons stood against walls, none willing to leave, yet all maintaining safe distance. The bartender reached below the counter, hand resting near the panic button, but she didn't press it. Something in her expression suggested she already knew how this would end. In the pregnant silence, the contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Jake, all flashy movement, theatrical aggression, and superficial strength. Mike, economical stillness, focused attention, and disciplined power. Last chance, Mike said quietly, the words barely carrying to the edges of the room. Jake's response was a predatory grin as he raised his gloved fists, shifting into a fighting stance that mimicked what he'd seen in televised UFC matches. Your funeral, old man. Jake launched forward with surprising speed, throwing a powerful haymaker aimed at Mike's head. The punch carried Jake's full weight and confidence behind it. A knockout blow by his estimation. It never connected. Mike's movement was so fluid it appeared almost casual. A slight tilt of his head, a subtle pivot on his good leg, and Jake's fist whistled through empty air. Before Jake could register his miss, Mike's hand had already clasped his extended wrist, using Jake's own momentum to pull him off balance. Jake stumbled forward, disbelief flashing across his face. He recovered quickly, throwing a left hook that should have caught Mike's ribs. Somehow, Mike was no longer where he should have been. Jake's punch again found nothing but air. Hold still. Jake growled, frustration mounting. In a real fight, Mike replied calmly, still not having thrown a single punch. No one holds still. Jake charged forward, attempting to use his superior weight and strength to tackle Mike against the wall. Mike sidestepped with remarkable efficiency, appearing to barely use his injured leg, and Jake crashed into an empty table. The bar watched in collective amazement as Jake, young, fit, and aggressive, couldn't land a single blow on the limping veteran he had mocked minutes earlier. Jake's face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Fight back, you coward." Mike's expression remained unchanged, but he finally spoke, his voice carrying easily in the silent room. "While you were practicing for cage matches, I was teaching Marines how to stay alive against enemies who wanted them dead," Mike said, effortlessly avoiding another wild swing. "While you were winning trophies, I was applying tourniquets to teenagers whose legs had been blown off." He blocked Jake's next punch with his forearm, the impact making Jake wince despite his gloves. "Your street fights and gym training?" Mike continued, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "They mean nothing to someone who's had to kill to protect his unit. Your registered weapons? I've disarmed men with actual weapons who had actual training and actual intent to kill." Jake threw a desperate combination. Right jab, left hook, right uppercut. Textbook moves that should have been effective. Mike neutralized each with minimal movement, conserving energy while Jake grew increasingly winded. "Real combat isn't about showing off or dominance displays," Mike said, his voice taking on an instructional tone that veterans in the room recognized from training scenarios. "It's about efficiency, about ending threats with minimum risk." Jake paused, breathing heavily, his confidence visibly crumbling as the reality of the situation dawned on him. The bar watched in silence as understanding finally crept into his eyes. He wasn't a predator here. He had never been. "I've been letting you wear yourself out," Mike explained matter-of-factly. "That's the first rule I taught my Marines. Never expend more energy than necessary." Jake's humiliation transformed into desperate fury. With a guttural roar, he charged forward recklessly, abandoning any pretense of technique. His right hand swung wide, the gloved fist aimed directly at Mike's face with all his remaining strength behind it. Time seemed to slow for those watching. Mike's response was a masterclass in efficient combat. His weight shifted smoothly, his center of gravity lowering slightly. As Jake's punch approached, Mike executed a precise counterstrike, not driven by anger or vengeance, but by trained muscle memory and calculated force application. His fist connected with Jake's jaw at the precise angle to impact the mandibular nerve. The strike was so fast that many in the bar would later debate exactly what they had seen. What no one disputed was the result. The impact produced a sickening crack that echoed through the silent bar. Jake's momentum halted instantly, his body going momentarily rigid before crumpling toward the floor. Before he fully collapsed, several white fragments, unmistakably pieces of teeth, scattered across the wooden floorboards, gleaming under the bar lights. Mike stepped back immediately, returning to a neutral stance as Jake hit the ground. Blood pooled around Jake's mouth as he lay stunned, his brain struggling to process what had happened. That, Mike said quietly, was one strike, at half power. The bar remained frozen in collective shock. Jake's friends stood paralyzed, their earlier bravado evaporated. One of them finally rushed forward to help Jake, who was now conscious but disoriented, spitting blood and tooth fragments onto the floor. "Jesus Christ," one patron whispered, breaking the silence. The older Vietnam veteran nodded appreciatively. "Perfect mandibular angle. They still teach that at Quantico, I see." Jake struggled to his knees, his hand covering his bleeding mouth, eyes wide with shock and pain. The reality of what had happened and who he had challenged was finally sinking in. "You've lost 3 teeth," Mike informed him clinically. "The jaw isn't broken, but you'll want to have it x-rayed. There might be hairline fractures." The professional detachment in Mike's voice was perhaps more intimidating than any threat could have been. It was a voice of someone who had seen and caused far worse injuries than this. "I'd suggest you leave now," Mike continued, his posture relaxed but alert. "The police have already been called, and you're facing assault charges. If you go peacefully, I won't add additional charges for the earlier harassment." Jake's friends helped him to his feet, all fight gone from his body, replaced by pain and humiliation. As the door closed behind Jake and his subdued friends, the honor medal bar remained silent for a moment before erupting into quiet conversations. Mike simply returned to his post, his professionalism unbroken despite what had just occurred. Sarah, the bartender, brought him a glass of water. "That was something else, Mike. Though I've seen you handle worse in Fallujah." Mike accepted the water with a slight nod. Hopefully the lesson sticks better than his teeth did. Throughout the bar, the incident had already transformed into beginnings of legend. Veterans explained to civilian friends what they had witnessed. Not just a fight, but a demonstration of the difference between aggression and controlled power, between bravado and true capability. "That's why you never judge a book by its cover," the Vietnam veteran told a wide-eyed college student at his table. Especially when that book might contain chapters written in combat. Mike's demonstration had revealed a deeper truth. Real strength isn't about intimidation or physical dominance, but about discipline, restraint, and precision. Jake had all the external markers of power, but lacked the substance behind them. Mike, despite his injury, possessed a distilled essence of capability that comes only through genuine experience and training. As the night progressed, several patrons approached Mike to discreetly thank him or show respect. He acknowledged each with quiet dignity, neither boasting about his actions nor diminishing them. What happened tonight at the Honor Medal Bar? We witnessed the dangerous mistake of judging someone's capability by their appearance. We saw the difference between those who talk about strength and those who embody it. If this story resonated with you, perhaps you know a veteran whose quiet strength deserves recognition. Share this video. Leave a comment about your experience with misjudging someone's abilities, or tell us about a veteran who's made a difference in your community. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the extraordinary capabilities of those we too often overlook.